the threefold ranks of active spiritual beings. For us, the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones represent the highest hierarchy among divine beings, an exalted rank of cosmic sacrificial service. These beings have come into the closest vicinity of the most exalted divinity we can speak of, the threefold divine power, or the Trinity. We must therefore picture the Godhead as beyond the seraphim. But the divine Trinity needs beings to execute its plan, and these beings must first prepare themselves for the task. The seraphim, cherubim, and thrones are those beings who are, so to speak, closest to the Godhead. The name seraphim, correctly understood in the ancient Hebrew esoteric sense, is always interpreted as referring to the beings who receive the highest ideas and aims of a cosmic system from the Trinity. The cherubim, belonging to the second rank of the hierarchies, have the task of elaborating in wisdom the aims and ideas received from the gods. The cherubim are thus spirits of exalted wisdom, capable of transposing into workable plans what is indicated by the seraphim. The thrones, who are in the third hierarchical rank from the Holy Trinity, counting from above, have, figuratively speaking, the task of putting into practice the high cosmic thoughts that have been conceived in wisdom, thoughts received by the seraphim from the gods and pondered over by the cherubim. The thrones appear to us as beings endowed with the power to transpose into a primary reality what has been first conceived by the cherubim. We have just been considering the first threefold hierarchy. The name of the first beings of the second hierarchy are the Kyriates, or dominions, or spirits of wisdom. They are followed by the mites, the dunamis, or virtues, as Dionysius the Areopagite, and following him, the teachers of the West, named them. They are also called the spirits of movement. They are the second degree of the second hierarchy. The third rank consists of the Exousiai, also called the powers, or potentates, by the teachers of the West. These are also known as the spirits of form. The first beings of the second hierarchy, the spirits of wisdom, Kyriates, or dominions, receive what the thrones bring down from the universe. What the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones bring down from the hand of God must be regulated, so that these commands and impulses are translated into reality. We know that on our physical earth, too, there is a certain hierarchical order, of which the mineral kingdom is the lowest stage. Then come the plant and animal kingdoms, and at the highest stage, man. Beyond man is the hierarchy of the angels, archangels, and archai, also called spirits of personality or principalities. Then the hierarchy of the Exousiai, also called spirits of form or powers, the dunamis, or spirits of movement, or mites, also virtues, and the Kyriates, or spirits of wisdom, or dominions. Then the highest hierarchy of thrones, cherubim, and seraphim. All these hierarchies, too, are involved in a constant process of evolution. The task of the angels is to lead and guide humanity. But because it is impossible for them to incarnate in the forms of earthly existence, to be able to help us, they must allow their wisdom to flow into the bodies of the purest, most highly developed men, in order that the divine truths may be proclaimed to humanity through their mouths. In such a case, we may say the angels clothe themselves in Maya. This becomes still more intelligible if we go back to times of remote antiquity and picture the 7 rishis of India. If we had looked at their outer forms, we should have seen simple men, perhaps peasants. The essential core of their being was concealed within them. Clairvoyantly, however, we should have seen them in flaming auras, from which warmth radiated into their surroundings. Divinity played upon them as if they were a scale of 7 tones. The language they spoke would have seemed to us nothing but unintelligible sounds. It is hardly possible nowadays to form any idea of the nature of language in those ancient times, because our own, by contrast, is a conglomeration of lifeless ideas which we employ to reach a logical conclusion. In the days of the rishis, it was the sound that caused pictures to rise up before the inner eye. What then was the original source of language? The wise men, the sages of ancient times, brought it down from the stars. For them, the zodiac was the script of the Godhead in the heavens. The zodiacal constellations created the consonants. The planets created the vowels. And according to how the planets altered their courses in the zodiac, the sages interpreted the various meanings of the heavenly wisdom. The bodies of the rishis were Maya, enshrining the inmost core of divinity. If we direct the light gained from spiritual science upon the words of the Bible, all the bleakness with which materialists are so prone to invest them disappears. We understand the real meaning of the words which say that God sent an angel in advance to prepare the way of the one who was to come. The angel is a more highly developed being of the hierarchy of the rank immediately above man, a being who sheathed his spirit in the Maya of a human body, in this case in the body of John the Baptist, the reincarnated Elijah. If we are to understand the words of the Bible truly, it is only a matter of shedding the right light upon them and interpreting them literally. Theologians are baffled by the words about the voice of a preacher in the wilderness, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. What can this mean? Anyone who had returned to his physical body after this experience during baptism was henceforth inwardly different from other men. He felt as if he were standing alone with this expansion of knowledge, separated from the rest of humanity. He felt that men could no longer understand him, that he was isolated, as it were in a wilderness, in solitude. And in this state of deepest inner isolation, he became aware of the voice of one crying, his angel. In this case, the guiding angel was clothed in the person of John the Baptist. That is the meaning of the passage in the Bible about the voice calling or crying in the wilderness. Later in St. Mark's Gospel, where Christ is proclaiming the highest wisdom in the schools, the words are, quote, "And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one that had authority, and not as the scribes," close quote. What does speaking, quote, "with authority," close quote, mean? Just as angels are the guides of individual men and archangels of whole peoples, so there are other, still higher beings, who are the guides of the forces and powers of nature. These are the sources upon which men of genius draw to create their masterpieces. The works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael give expression to the powers of nature. To picture where these powers of nature are made manifest, let us imagine that we are standing on the heights of a Swiss mountain. If we are fortunate enough to be there at sunrise, we shall be overwhelmed by the magic and sublimity of this spectacle of nature, and we shall feel pervaded through and through by the mighty forces radiating from it and revealing to us the power of Almighty God. We watch how from the glimmering gray of dawn the first delicate colors of the rising sun appear, how the peaks of the snow-capped mountains are suffused with rosy mauve, and our eyes are dazzled by this spectacle of greater and greater brilliance. In this majestic manifestation of nature, we are actually beholding the confluence of spiritual forces, and these forces are the beings of the hierarchies we have learned to know as the Exousiai, the powers, or spirits of form. In the original text, the words are, quote, "He taught as the Exousiai teach," close quote. Christ spoke with the powers of these beings. In John the Baptist, it was the angel, the being of the rank immediately above man, who spoke. In Christ, it was the Exousiai, who, as I have said, speak through events of nature. It was their forces in the body of Christ which enabled him to teach, quote, "with authority." John the Baptist had received the highest initiation connected with the constellation of Aquarius. In old maps of the zodiac, the sign depicting Aquarius is a man stooping down with the arms held in a particular position. This illustrates the words in St. Mark's Gospel, quote, "There cometh after me one mightier than I, the latchet of whose shoes I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose," close quote. Ultimately, as long as we believe that we are nothing more than an amalgam of bones, blood, flesh, and so on, that is, of elements studied by the ordinary natural sciences, particularly by physiology, biology, and anatomy, we cannot understand ourselves as human beings. Studying the members of our being more closely will reveal that spiritual beings of the hierarchies are working purposefully and wisely together in the processes that run their course in our body outside of our awareness. Even the relatively sketchy outline in my above-mentioned esoteric science shows you already how complicated this collaboration of the various spirits of the higher hierarchies really is. But complicated or not, to understand our being, we must study these things closely in concrete detail. To start with, we can ask a concrete yet immensely complicated question, namely, what is the hierarchy of the seraphim, or the dunamis, for example, doing now in 1918 in our etheric body? Indeed, we can ask this kind of question with just as much justification as we can ask whether it is currently raining in Lugano. In both cases, the answer cannot be found by simply thinking or theorizing about the subject. Rather, we must get at the facts. For example, we would have to send a telegram or letter to find out whether it's currently raining in Lugano. Similarly, we must delve into the facts to find out, for example, what task the spirits of wisdom or the thrones are currently fulfilling in our etheric body. Of course, such questions are extremely complicated, and our answers can only be approximate. This will keep us from becoming proud and arrogant in our striving for true insights and knowledge. In a sense, the higher beings that concern us directly are the ones about whom we can attain some clarity and certainty. They are also the ones we need to understand clearly, so that we're not asleep in regard to their role in our development. A question to start with, and one that concerns us directly, especially in the present time, asks about the work the angels, the higher beings in the hierarchy immediately above us, are currently doing in our astral body. The angels are the hierarchy directly above ours, and are thus, of all hierarchies, the closest to us. To begin answering such a question, we must take spiritual science seriously. We're not just playing with words and ideas here, but our spiritual science works in areas where the spiritual world becomes accessible, and the hierarchy immediately adjacent to ours can indeed be made palpable and comprehensible. To find out what the angels are doing in our astral body, we must advance to a certain level of clairvoyant perception, so that we can look into our astral body and see what is going on there. In other words, we have to achieve at least a certain level of imaginative perception if we want to answer the question under discussion. Then, we will be able to see that the hierarchy of the angels is forming images in our astral body. The angels are both working jointly and also individually, since each one of them has a specific task to fulfill for the person under his charge, and each of us has an angel, as I've explained before. The angels are forming images in our astral body, and they do so under the direction of the spirits of form. Without imaginative perception, we could not know that the angels are continuously forming images in our astral body, images that appear and then vanish again in constant ebb and flow. Without these images, we cannot develop toward a future that is in line with the intentions of the spirits of form. What the spirits of form want to achieve with us until the end of our earthly development must first be embodied in images, and these images will later be instrumental in transforming humanity. They will then become real. Those are the images the spirits of form are already now creating in our astral body with the help of the angels and reality. We can see and access the images the angels generate in our astral body once we have developed our thinking to a certain level of clairvoyance. We can then observe these images and see that they're formed according to very specific impulses and principles. We'll find that the process that gives rise to these images holds within it the forces for our future development. Strange as this may sound, we can observe the angels as they're working and see that with their work, they're carrying out a definite intention for the social structure of our future life on Earth. In other words, they want to generate images in our astral body that will lead to specific social conditions and structures for the human society of the future. Whether we acknowledge the work of the angels for our future or deny it does not matter at all. The angels are working on our ideals for the future regardless. Their work is guided by a specific principle, namely that in the future nobody shall enjoy happiness in peace as long as there are others who are unhappy. That is, a certain impulse of universal fellowship, of community. Fellowship understood in the right way, that is, prevails in regard to social conditions in the physical world. This is one of the impulses according to which the angels form pictures in our astral body. The second impulse that guides the angels' work concerns the intention they have for our soul life. Regarding this soul life, the angels want to impress images on our astral body that will, in the future, lead us to see every person we encounter as carrying a spark of the divine concealed within. In other words, the angels are working on changing things. What the angels intend for us is that we no longer consider ourselves merely as higher animals and solely on the basis of our physical nature. Instead, in our encounters with others, we are to see in everyone a revelation coming from the divine ground of the world, a revelation in flesh and blood. A strong feeling of the divine revelation in every person we meet must animate and guide us at all times. Through their work, the angels are preparing us for seeing everyone as an image that reveals itself to us from out of the divine ground of the world, and they embody understanding as seriously, as strongly, and as compassionately as possible in the images they impress on our astral body. As a result of what the angels intend, in the future people will only become religious on the basis of seeing everyone as an image of God. And this will not be mere theory, but permeate their everyday life. This means that in the future there can no longer be a compulsion for people to join a particular religion or denomination. Indeed, that will no longer be needed because every encounter with another person will be a religious act, a sacrament. Churches of any kind and their external institutions in the physical world will no longer be needed to sustain religious belief. In other words, if the churches understand themselves rightly, they cannot have any other goal but to make themselves redundant on the physical plane by turning all of life into an expression of the supersensory or spiritual realm. In any case, at the bottom of the impulses guiding the work of the angels is the intention to spread religious freedom over all of humanity. In addition, the angels want to enable us to come to the spirit by way of our thinking, to bridge the abyss between the physical world and the spiritual realm with our thinking. In other words, spiritual science for the spirit, religious freedom for the soul, and fellowship for the body. These are the principles resounding like a cosmic melody through the workings of the angels in our astral body. All we need to experience firsthand the angels' wonderful activity in our astral body is to raise our consciousness to a certain higher level. As part of our development, we must gradually come to realize what I've explained. When you look around with open eyes, you will see that these days very many people are really deeply asleep. They don't care about what happens in the world and remain indifferent and detached. The great events of world history often pass them by, just as we don't notice what happens in the city at night while we're sleeping. Though people seem to be awake, in reality they're asleep to what is going on. And it is precisely when people in their waking hours sleep through significant events that we can see how the angels are working in their astral body in the way I've described, and their work is taking place whether we want to believe it or not. All this seems mysterious and paradoxical. We often consider this or that person to be unworthy of any kind of relationship to the spiritual world, when in reality, the individual in question turns out to be really quite a sleepyhead in this incarnation, one who sleeps through everything going on around him or her. However, at the same time, the angel is at work in that person's astral body as part of the whole community of angels that is working on the future of humanity. The angel makes use of that individual's astral body regardless, and we can observe the work being done in that astral body. What matters here is that such insights are increasingly pushing their way into our consciousness. We must therefore develop our consciousness soul to the point of acknowledging what can be discovered only in this way. We will learn to see how the angels are preparing our future. In other words, what spiritual science teaches us in this regard must become practical wisdom for our daily life. We must make it our own to such an extent that we can be firmly convinced that the angels work toward the intentions I have outlined above. Since we have already progressed quite far in our development toward freedom, it will depend entirely on us whether we will sleep through the above described change or move toward it consciously. Indeed, there will come a time we don't want to sleep through, a time when we will receive through our angel an inspiring impulse from the spiritual world. That impulse will inspire us to become much more deeply interested in everyone else than we are now. This enhanced interest in our fellow humans will not develop gradually and conveniently, remaining primarily subjective. On the contrary, it will come in one fell swoop when the spiritual world pours into us the mysterious realization of what every person really is, and it will immeasurably enrich our social life. The second revelation from the world of the angels will show us irrefutably that the Christ impulse leads to religious freedom, among other things, and that the hallmark of true Christianity is that it makes absolute freedom of religion possible. The third revelation is the incontrovertible realization that the world is spiritual. It is what the angel is preparing us for with its images in our astral body. At the same time, there are beings that have an interest in knocking us off track. What I've just explained is part of our divine development. Indeed, if we followed our own spiritual nature, we would have to realize what the angel is unfolding in our astral body. You may wonder what will happen if humanity insists on sleeping through the important spiritual revelation that is coming. For example, if people were to sleep through the second part of that revelation, that is the part about freedom of religion, and thus would miss the recurrence of the mystery of Golgotha on the etheric plane, then the angels would have to find a different way to do what they had intended to accomplish with the images in our astral body. I've often talked about the coming of the etheric Christ, and if people are not awake for it, and for the other simultaneous occurrences, then the angels would have to find another approach. As it turns out, what we don't allow the angels to accomplish by our refusing to wake up to things, they will then have to carry out by means of our sleeping body. In other words, what we are sleeping through in our waking hours and thus prevent the angels from fully accomplishing, those things would then have to be achieved with the help of our sleeping physical body and our etheric body, both of which remain behind in our bed when we're asleep. The angels would then be looking in those bodies for the forces they need to help them accomplish their tasks. The tasks that could not be carried out while we are awake, and our waking soul is in our etheric body and physical body, will then have to be done with our sleeping etheric body and physical body. That is, during the time when our I and our astral body are outside us while we are sleeping. When we're asleep like this, to the important events around us, we run a great risk. That is, if humanity continues with its refusal to turn to the Spirit, then at some point before the third millennium, the consequences of our stubborn resistance could descend upon us. It's really not long anymore to the third millennium, which begins in the year 2000. If the angels have to work with our sleeping body instead of being able to use our waking soul to accomplish their task, they would have to move all their work out of our astral body and immerse it in our etheric body in order to carry out their mission. However, we will not be there, and thus not be part of this. If the angels have to carry out their task in the etheric body, they can do so only if we're not there, because if we were there in our waking state, we would keep the angels from doing their work. This gives you a general picture of the risk involved in not wanting to be awake to things. In particular, if the angels had to do their work in our etheric body and our physical body while we're sleeping, that is, they would have to work in our absence, three things will occur in humanity's development. First of all, as the angels work in our sleeping body, in the absence of our astral body and I, a certain instinctive power will be created. And we will simply find it there when we wake up in the morning. In other words, we'll simply be given certain instinctive insights rather than having to attain them through our freedom. What we find as we wake up every morning will be instinct rather than being based on our free consciousness. These instinctive insights are indeed part of our development and are connected to the mysteries of conception and birth, to our whole sexual life. They become dangerous and harmful when we receive them as a result of the above-described refusal to wake up to the angel's work in our astral body. If human development takes the turn described above, then certain sexual instincts will emerge and gain ground, not in a beneficial or useful way in our waking clear consciousness, but in a destructive way as pure instincts. These instincts will not only sidetrack us, but they will also influence our social structures. In particular, what will then enter our bloodstream as a result of our sexual life will keep us from developing any kind of fellowship on earth. Instead, these instincts would goad us at all times into rebelling against fellowship, a rebellion that would be purely instinctual. Thus we face a moment of decision, a decisive crossroads. Either we go to the right, and then we must be awake to things, or we go to the left, and then we can sleep through everything. However, in this latter case, instincts will emerge that will have dreadful consequences. Natural scientists' response to the emergence of these instincts will be to say that this development was inevitable and an absolute necessity, that it is simply inherent in human evolution. After all, whether human beings turn into angels or devils, the natural sciences would have an explanation in either case. For to them, everything happens as a result of what precedes it. They will naturally come an absolute necessity that people become near devils because of their sexual instincts. It is only through spiritual, supersensible insight that these things can be understood. The second consequence that will follow from the work that will cause changes in the angels is an instinctive but detrimental knowledge of certain remedies. Indeed, everything related to medicine will get a tremendous boost in the materialistic sense. People will instinctively perceive the healing properties of certain substances and certain activities, and will do great harm with that. But they will call the harm they do useful and beneficial. As a result, people will call the sick healthy, for they will realize that then they can get involved in certain activities, perform certain actions that they will enjoy. Indeed, people will enjoy doing what is unwholesome. Basically, there will be growing knowledge of the healing properties of certain processes and activities, but it will lead us onto dangerous ground. Above all, people will learn through certain of their instincts which illnesses are caused by certain substances and actions, and then they can decide on the basis of purely egotistic motives whether to produce these illnesses or not. The third consequence of the above-described turn in human development will be that we come to know certain forces that can easily be manipulated to unleash vast mechanical power over the whole world. Simply harmonizing certain vibrations can release tremendous powers. As a result, we will be able to instinctively exert some control over the realm of mechanics and machines, and then technology as a whole will be on dangerous ground. Our egotism will be pleased with this development and find it useful. To properly appreciate these concrete details concerning our development, we must develop a spiritual view of life. For without it, if we rely on an unspiritual view, these things will remain unclear to us. Without a spiritual view of life, we will be at a loss when the above-described harmful medicine takes hold, when our sexual instincts go badly astray, when the world mechanism goes awry regarding the use of natural resources through spiritual powers. Without a spiritual worldview, we would not be able to understand or even notice these things and how they are pushing us off our true path. Indeed, without spiritual understanding, we would be much like the sleeping person who does not notice the thief coming at night to rob him and only sees the damage later when waking up, and by then it is too late. It would be a rough awakening indeed. We would delight in the expansion of our instinctive knowledge of the healing properties of certain substances and processes. We would enjoy living out our sexual instincts gone awry, and we would praise particularly this last aberration as an exceptionally fine form of the superhuman and of impartiality and tolerance. In a sense, what is ugly would become beautiful for us, and vice versa. And we would not even notice this, because it would appear to us as an absolute necessity, as the way things must be. Nevertheless, we would be off our true course, which has been prescribed for us, even in regard to our own inner nature. In contrast, once we accept spiritual science and develop a sense for how it can color our outlook on everything, we can seriously consider the truths I've talked about here today. Then we can draw from these truths what we can also draw from spiritual science as a whole, namely that spiritual science also implies a certain commitment, a lifetime commitment. Regardless of what we're doing or where we are, the important thing is always to remember that everything we do must be steeped in and illuminated by our anthroposophical consciousness. And that is how we can contribute to advancing the development of humanity in the right way. Indeed, it is a grave mistake to believe that spiritual science, understood rightly and sincerely, would ever lead us away from the practical and important work of our life. True, spiritual science awakens us to the things I've talked about today. We can use an analogy here and say that insight into the spiritual world is, to our normal waking state, like a further waking up, just as our normal waking state is an awakening from sleep.